virtual advocacy and action session. We're going to hear from Greg Wilson. Welcome, Greg. You're all the way from Vancouver.
Mm-hmm.
And he's the Director of Government Relations in BC with Retail Council of Canada on COVID-19, and we'll be hearing on the COVID-19 strategies for retailers on how you can safely reopen your business in the phase 2 of the BC Restart Plan, which we are now in. Also joining in the conversation is our longtime resident, local resident, James Retty. James is the owner of Escape Route, both in Whistler and Squamish. And you'll be providing us with your experience on not reopening, but I believe you did stay open. So that'll be really interesting to hear your insight. We've had some great conversations, and you've certainly been a huge part of the work that we've all been doing in the last few months. So thanks for all the work that you're sharing. So the purpose of this series is to ensure that you, our members, and the broader business community in Whistler have the opportunity to ask your most pressing questions. As retailers, we really want to make sure that you have all the tools and resources that you need to successfully reopen or open your shops and stores during this really difficult time. So we are using Zoom. Most of you, I see from our registration list, have been on our Zooms before, but just in case you haven't, you can post questions through the Q&A, which is at the very bottom of your screen. Just go into that, click on it, simply type your question, and then you can also hit like, and that will upvote a question, which will then be automatically placed at the top of the most voted questions. I hope that made sense. It's now my pleasure to introduce both Greg and James. Greg represents the interests of the retail industry with governments in BC. In addition, Greg serves as on the board of 2 registered not-for-profit agencies and Corp Pacific in Canada, which manages used beverage containers and the Major Appliance Recycling Roundtable. James, of course, as I mentioned, longtime local, was here 25 years ago is when you established your business, I believe. I hope I got that right. 30? You better update your... So 30 years ago, through you traveled worldwide to get to where you are. So bringing your passions and your desire to travel in one space in a shop. So thank you so much for being here. So Greg, why don't we get started with you? You've got some really great intel for our retailers. And from my knowledge of walking through the village, many of them are looking for, what do we do? How do we reopen? And you're that key to the success of their reopening. So I'll hand it off to you.
So thank you, Melissa. So first I have to say, not to intentionally start singling out James, but I've done this a few times. And so I have to say that the people who stayed open, particularly the small independent stores who stayed open, are truly our heroes. They've helped us in a way that's kind of intangible, that people don't understand, is some of the best practices we're seeing rolled out now are a result of those people who stayed open throughout. And so you've had groceries, pharmacies, but also independents in a whole bunch of categories stay open. And in BC, pretty much all retail stores could have stayed open. So BC is different. BC and the territories are different than the rest of the country because there was not a requirement, strictly speaking, to close. And so we've had an iterative process with the government for about 2 months now about, back and forth about various guidance material. So you'll see that reflected on the dominant guidance, which is the BC Centre for Disease Control guidance, which is essentially the health officer's guidance. You'll see a bit of that in the WorkSafe BC piece. WorkSafe BC has actually, strangely, 2 sets of retail guidance. So the piece that's been up for longer has had a lot of our impact on it, where the piece that went up last Friday, I candidly would remain a bit unhappy with. So, but I'm committed to working through those problems, and I think that we can still ensure that WorkSafe has good guidance. The other major difference in British Columbia is that government has a view that each business is different. In retail, we know that each business is different because the product mix is different, and the store formats are different, and marketing strategies are different. But that's helpful to understand, because in BC, there are things that are not overly prescriptive. Sometimes that's because there isn't good science, and sometimes that's because government understands that there will be different ways of doing things, different ways of achieving the same best result. So that unfortunately sometimes lends a bit of confusion. But for example, I have gotten a lot of questions in the last 2 days about apparel returns. So not just focus on apparel returns, but to use it as an example. There's not a lot of science here yet. So there are best practices, but I expect best practices will change as the science helps us understand how the virus is spread. So I have 3 slides. If we could just show the first one, which is the recovery playbook one. We have a retail council. I gather that they're going to share the slides or post the slides, and certainly the link, you could post the link. The Retail Council has a 6-part recovery playbook. It's actually, you can download either the entire thing or individual chapters. And these talk to best practices. I have to say the playbook's changing. It's a bit dynamic because experiences in retail are changing. So some of the pieces of the operational piece of the playbook has changed even in the last week as more stores have opened and we've learned more about practice. So it's available for free download. I think you have to register, but it's free download from our website. And so it covers operations, marketing, finance, keeping employees and customers safe. If we flip to the next slide quickly, there's also a slide here about the key health guidance with the 2 links. These are to the BC Centre for Disease Control website. It's sort of the definitive health guidance, but essentially the main piece of guidance is to maintain the 2 meters physical distance as much as you can, and to increase frequency of cleaning and disinfection of high-touch surfaces. There's some emphasis on signage, particularly preventing ill customers and employees from entering the store. And if we flip to the 3rd and final slide, trying to do this quickly, there's some work-safe recommendations for retail. They aren't yet 1 page, they're 2 pages. It's a bit weird. The first one, which I think is the top one of these 2, is better developed because it's actually that page has been up since March at some point. The second one was the one posted since last Friday. It's changed an amount since last Friday, and I'm still hopeful it will change some more because it has some recommendations that I'd like to see tweaked a bit. Okay, I'm good with the slides. Excellent. So I've talked too much.
No, you haven't. It's great. You're here to talk to us and speak with us. So I think that's great. And yes, we will be providing those links to our members. Absolutely. James, I just wanted to bring you into the conversation before we go to some questions that I have right off the top. Your experience in keeping open, you and I have chatted about some of the things you've done to reopen with your staff especially. So can you walk us through a little bit about what, as a retailer yourself, the safety protocols that you put in place to create confidence in your staff first, and then how that translates over to your customers, and what successes have you had? And so, you know, what can you share with our group today?
Okay, well, thanks, Melissa. I guess first off, a little bit of a correction. You said that I started the store 30 years ago. I didn't. Jason and Tom Duguid started that store up 30 years ago. And the reason I mention this is I've learned a lot from them. You know, the old saying, we stand on the shoulders of giants. We're doing new things every day. And hopefully our retail compatriots, our retail cohort, can learn from those of us who have stayed open, and we can all learn from each other. So I just want to get that out there. I'm not the instigator of this thing. But what have we done? We have stayed open all the way through. And honestly, at the very beginning, it was quite stressful for myself. It would have been a lot easier if the government had said to me, hey, shut down.
Right.
because there was a lot of quiet social pressure to do that. And I think tolerance is the most important thing we all need to have. And so my compatriots who closed down, good for them. They did what they thought was best, and I appreciate that. I know that my customers were very happy that I was open in a very careful fashion. Door was closed, one person at a time, call for appointments. We delivered a lot of stuff, curbside pickup, all of that. And that was appreciated by staff. We want to talk about staff first, how we made them feel comfortable, and ultimately then by our consumers. And the reality is if our staff are not comfortable with being at work and our customers are not comfortable coming in the door, if they don't feel welcome and safe, then none of us have a business. So it's super, super important. For my staff, they like the idea right off the get-go of limiting our customers inside the stores. So that was really good. I got to say, we had to lay off 75% of our staff, very significant event, hired some back. A number of them have wanted to stay home. They had their own health concerns or people within their household. They had some sort of compromised health situation. So the first thing that we need to do as employers is fully respect that. Mm-hmm. I am in the process of calling back employees now, and I see all of the names that are on here. Some of these people will be experiencing the same challenges that I have, where you have some employees that are on that CERB side of things, and they are weighing, do they want to be involved with public or just hold out for the CERB thing? So for my key employees, I've told them I will maintain their position within our organization as long as I possibly can to respect their decisions. So a lot of that is trying to build comfort with my staff. Then if they have that comfort from physical distancing, we had this sanitization station at the front early on with gloves for guests. We've asked our guests to wear those as they come into the store. Greg was talking about quarantining product. That has evolved a little bit as well. Initially, it was 0 try-ons of garments, and then it was as long as it's not an over-the-head item. So if it's shoes or something like that, that was fine. As it came to over-the-head pieces, what we are currently doing is if someone tries something on and they don't buy it, it comes into our back room. We have 3 separate sections, a Q3, Q2, and Q1. So it goes on to Q 3 days out. And then that close of day, it goes on to quarantine 2. The next day, it goes to quarantine 1. So we don't have any cross-contaminations. And then on the 3rd day, it comes out onto the floor. And the reason I've chosen 3 is that CDC has said 2 days. So that gives me that extra little layer of comfort. And my staff have that too. And now our customers do. So that's been important for us, all of those things.
And is that a question, I guess, for you as well, Greg, is that a personal decision? Like you've got, because a lot of retailers that I've spoken to that their doors are open are doing very different things. And so as a resort community, we know it's really important that the guest experience it's vital to the success of our reopening. And I guess my question then, Greg, is what James is doing, is it one of many different things that can be done? Are there regulations now through WorkSafe BC that says you have to do a certain thing when we're talking about a clothing store, or even for that matter, even if it's a trinket shop or a gift shop? How do you manage that?
So there are 2 trends in apparel. And so one trend is to ask the customers fairly firmly or insist that customers wash or sanitize their hands as they're coming in the store so that employees and customers alike can feel comfortable. And then you have the quarantine piece. And usually it's both, but sometimes it's just one or the other. I've heard one now, steam cleaning, but there's just no scientific evidence that that helps. In fact, there's some suggestion that that might spread the virus. So we're going to have to wait and see what science says on how long the virus can live. And it's very important with apparel to remember that not all 2 fabrics are alike, and accordingly, it may live a different period of time on 100% cotton than on some mix of fabrics.
Interesting. So there's a lot of unknowns right now. And so I guess, you know, the purpose of this webinar is to give our retailers the best outcomes for them to reopen. So I know the resources, will be sharing some resources through WorkSafe BC, through the Retail Council of Canada, to ensure that they have checklists and worksheets that they can provide to their staff, as well as what to do with their customers. It sounds to me like it might be quite vague in terms of how to manage the clothing options at this point, and more information is to come. So the better safety precautions that you take now will benefit in the long run.
Well, I think James highlighted something that's very important, is it's changed even in the period of time James has been open.
Right.
And I think it will continue to change.
Right.
We have a sign on our front door now that has about 11 things on it that says what we're doing.
Mm-hmm.
That started at about 6, maybe 5 things, and then it's grown and things have been added to it. And excuse me, sorry about that. When you speak of there are no clear directives, or there seems to be few very clear directives for the garment industry, and I'm garments and equipment as well. So on some of my steel surfaces, way back when we were just getting out of ski touring and we had rental gear coming in, anything that came in had a bleach solution, 10-to-1 bleach solution, sprayed on it, and then it sat in the back for that day to dry. So we've been trying different things, but the most important thing that all of our members can think of is we need to make sure that our customers feel comfortable. That's the first and foremost thing. And I've asked customers in the store if I can build that rapport with them, because I'm on the floor a lot now, more than I used to be, because I don't have to sound. I've asked customers, what do they want to feel comfortable? And most of them, I've had a few good suggestions, but most of them are like, you guys are doing it. Like, that's good. I feel comfortable in here. And if they can give me little suggestions to help it work better, then great. But I think just our customers knowing that we're doing the best we can will make a big difference. And Whistler Retail is so insular. We have such great opportunities to engage with our guests that.
And that's why there's an experience. It's very different. I think, you know, you go to Vancouver, there's an experience you have with a particular retailer, but in Whistler, it's an experience. It's from one retailer to the next. And that then becomes the resort experience when it comes to walking through the village, going to Function Junction, wherever, Creekside, wherever it happens to be. A question I have for you, Greg, is, so a few people have asked me whether or not temperature checks are vital. Is that something that the Retail Council of Canada has discussed or come to terms with in terms of what that would look like?
So
it's a little crazy, but it's
likely we've discussed pretty much every idea that's possible. So remembering that the #1 sources of advice are Dr. Tam, the National Health Officer, Director of Health, and Dr. Bonnie Henry, the Provincial Health Officer in BC. We have the same discussions around masks. And so there is, I can think of one grocery chain, not in Whistler, but in suburban Canada, which is checking temperatures. But customers have the ability to decline. I gather that most are not declining. We have a number of chains where customers are asked or required to wear masks. I think there's a new major chain that's going to strongly recommend masks today. But grocery is different from apparel often, and particularly independent apparel, in that you'll have more people in a store. So those two, well, we're learning a lot from grocery. I'm not sure that that's always relevant to apparel. And then there's another question that's tangential but interesting to your question, is requiring employees to have temperature checks or wear masks. So there's an amount of discussion about whether that's a viable alternative. There is a major chain, Canadian chain, that is not providing shifts to employees who refuse to wear masks. But there's some ethical considerations and legal considerations around all of that.
Right. So it's still out there.
It's still
undecided. Yeah, because I know, I run the chamber, but I'm also shopping, and I also have, some I see and I watch and I hear. And certainly when you look at the staff that are coming back, they're working in very close quarters, but they don't live together. So how, that's another concern for customers as well, from what I'm hearing, is how do you manage that social distancing while at work? A lot of our retailers, Escape Route's done a great job of closing the back door. They've got a much larger space, so you can almost, and limited number of people, so you can limit the number of people in there and manage it. Some of the other shops, and most of them, are really quite small. And so when you get 3 or 4 people in there, all of a sudden you're quite tight. Plus you have 2 staff. So it's a really, it's quite the juggle to understand exactly what's best case scenarios. So any advice on small retailers?
So Dr. Tam's advice is interesting here. Whenever people are going to be within 6 meters, even inadvertently, she's recommending masks to protect the others.
Right.
And Dr. Henry seems to be pretty close to that position as well. So I think in very crowded settings, that seems appropriate. There's a lot of small individual retail that I've seen where the square footage is so small that you really can't have very many customers, where they are limiting either to 1 person per household or to 1 or 2 customers at a time. And often customers are fairly patient. There seems to be something we've learned about the length of the line. If you're 1 or 2 waiting in line, there's not too much of an impatience factor. But when there's longer lines at groceries or general merchants, customers seem less patient and forgiving with that.
Right. One of the questions I just received was, does a retailer require to have a safety plan? And James, you've probably done this, a safety plan in place, written, what is on there? And I do believe WCB has a checklist so that you can actually check that, but also a safety plan written. And what is your recommendation on that? So maybe Greg, I'll get you to talk a little bit about what those recommendations are. And if not, we can certainly send everyone over to WCB. And then James, you've been really tied into watching what's been going on as well. So what have you then done to ensure that you either have a safety plan, and what have you put up on the outside of your door? So Greg, maybe we can go to you first.
And here I was thinking James would be better first.
Oh, well, that's fine. We can go to James.
I think we should go to James first.
James is on the ground running with it, so absolutely.
So sure, I'd love to talk about that. I just want to back up to masks for 1 second. It's a very polarizing thing. Some people seem to be very pro-mask and some are very anti-mask. We're trying to be very middle of the road. I also think it's important for all of our retailers who are here that this is going to evolve. The acceptance of masks is going to evolve as reinfections evolve with coronavirus or with COVID-19. So I would suggest that most of us prepare for the possibility of our staff needing to wear masks, not because we get mandated from any government thing, but because it's what our customers want us to do. So we have masks in the store right now for our staff. My guys so far have chosen to not want to wear them. They feel okay. But they also know that my customers can ask politely, they can ask any way they want, but they can ask for my staff to wear a mask. And I've asked my staff to say yes. And there's right now, actually, I only have in there, because I haven't wanted to do it, I've got 1 stashed mask in a plastic bag that can't be used. We've got proper ones from Outdoor Research with filters coming, all the rest of it. But I think it would be wise to prepare for the possibility of needing to wear masks for our customers' comfort level.
Right.
The posting of safety notices and such, and allowing staff to be aware of what we are doing. I got to admit, I'm no rock star at this. I do the best I can to keep my staff up to date, but things change fairly quickly.
You do.
So there are emails that go out to our crew that are fairly regular emails, kind of 2 to 3 a week, saying, this is what we're doing. Great job, guys. That'll go. Here's the change. So it's posted at the front door and then also behind the cash registers for all of my staff to see. I have done some things online and early on, but we haven't recently. I'm actually going to do a little Instagram thing, probably today, walking a customer through our store, because I want them to know what we're doing. I want them to feel comfortable.
It's a really great idea. It's that
so, and it's going to kind of highlight our store and let people know that we've been open all the way through. Right. So there is information on BC WCB, and it's worth going through, and they have a retailer section. Some of it will not apply to some of the retailers who are in here, and others things will. So it's worth doing, making your notes, and then developing your own store's safety checklist.
Right. No, I think that's a great thing. Greg, did you want to add anything to that, or is that?
Sure. So WorkSafe, and in fact, it's an order of the provincial health officer, so it's the law. You must have a written health workplace COVID-19 safety plan, and that's the only, that and the fact that it has to be posted, we'll cover that in a second, is really the only requirement. There is guidance on the WorkSafe website, as James said, not always applicable to every sector, but essentially people are going to want to they have to create a written plan, and you have to be able to furnish that written plan to a health or WorkSafe inspector when they come and visit your store, or should they come and visit your store. You must also post something in the store in a place where employees, customers, and suppliers or contractors can see it. So that's in a public place. And you must also post it on your website. But you don't have to post a safety plan. So James talked about a sign listing his 11 measures. Is it 11, James? My expectation is something like that is appropriate. I saw a very cute, actually I thought it was an excellent marketing technique, walk through a store similar to what James is going to do today, explaining to customers. Frankly, it's posted on a retailer's front page. I expect that probably qualifies a bit itself, except that the WorkSafe or the provincial health officer's thing says you have to post a written plan. But I might be arguing that that's a plan, because in fact, on a website, people don't tend to read the legal text, just as they don't necessarily when they're coming into the store. The number one thing you kind of need to do something about is this question of preventing ill customers and employees from entering the store. So I've seen an awful lot of signs at the entrances of stores saying, please do not enter this store if you are ill or have symptoms of respiratory illness, because that is the number one thing on that checklist. Right. So I find that's the most consistent thing I see, and then I see other things about cleaning and encouraging physical distance and what have you as well.
That makes sense. So just to recap what we've just talked about, what I'm hearing then is a safety plan is required. Does not need to be posted for public outside, but needs to be on your website.
It needs to be posted somewhere in your store and on your website, but the plan doesn't have to be posted.
Right. So
I have an email from the Deputy Provincial Health Officer that says it can be a summary.
Okay, and that's what James has. I've seen it, and I've seen even with Crank Coffee, they have a big board outside, and they actually show all the different things. So people are doing some different, very unique ways of showing it. And I think what James is doing is being more creative with the visual piece, which I think is a brilliant way to do that. So, and then
so there was a WorkSafe request that's very interesting early on that said, oh, it would be best if there were standard signs. And my answer to that was, actually, innovation is interesting. And what's interesting about retail stores is that no two are the same, and people do approach these things differently. And I've noticed there's a lot of variance even to you know, in stores with aisles and stores with regular waiting, there's a lot of variance in those stickers outside, you know, stand here. Sometimes they're heart, sometimes they're feet, sometimes they have different looks. I just love that. I think that makes it interesting for customers.
No, I agree. I think so too. Fumiko has posed a question. It's been sitting there for a bit. The question is, what is a good way to figure out how many customers to have in a store at one time, square footage? And I think that as a consumer myself, it's that that you have.
So it's really going to depend on what your customers are going to be comfortable with, I'd argue. But there is Post-its. It says one every 4 years, and you're supposed to of retail space, and you're supposed to subtract space for fixtures and displays. You have to both customers and employees as one person for 5. It's a recommendation. No two retail stores are alike. If you can imagine, a mattress store doesn't have a lot of spaces between mattresses, so that would be one. But my understanding, and I've spoken to a lot of grocers about it, and they have the most crowded stores, is that none of them are even allowing one person for every 5 square meters as that's worked out. They've all set their numbers to be something lower, really to what can be comfortably handled by the staff in the store at the time. And so that's more likely to be how you set that number.
Right, that makes really good sense. And I'm really surprised our group today is not asking me questions, so I'm going to put it out there. Don't forget, if you've got some questions, this is your chance to ask and get some of those questions answered. Hillary Davison is on there on our line, and she runs Camp Coffee down at Function Junction, and they've done a really interesting thing where there's only 2 people allowed in at any time. And it gives it's a lot more space than required, but it certainly gives you that safe distancing from people. Sorry, James, you seem to have a question or a comment?
Well, I would like to ask all of the people who are attending this what their thoughts are, but I don't know how they can vote, or if they can just say yes or no or whatever.
They can use the Q&A, or they can use the chat box. Yeah, use the Q&A so we can focus in on one area, but yeah, go ahead.
So as a resort entity, we have lots of guests coming in, and they see all the different stores, and that's part of that fabric, that retail fabric is what makes us so successful. And Greg was talking about how we don't want there was initial talk of a standardized sign or something like that. I would have a question for this crew is, do they think that if TW, Tourism Whistler, was to have a group of people, I'm not looking for a committee, and TW may not be the right group to do this. Maybe it's a chamber thing, I don't know. But someone goes through the stores, speaks with the owner, the manager, and says, hey, yeah, here's kind of our checklist, and these are the things that we need to accommodate for each store. Yeah, you guys are doing this. You might want to think about this. And then once we've gone through that, then there can be something on that store that says, you know, Whistler Resort Safe, or like,
so the good news is, yeah, I'd love to hear, because one of the things with our economic partnership initiative, we're actually meeting again this afternoon, is coming up with resources as a partnership. And one of the things that we've got out, and it just launched yesterday, is some of those guidelines, but a checklist is something we are talking about. So from this group, you know, again, that question is, would that be helpful, and would they use it?
Checklist and sign that can go on the door, a little small sticker, maybe it's RMOW, that says, you know, these guys are doing everything they can.
Yeah.
That's what's important for our guests to see, that that particular retailer is doing their damnedest to make sure this is a safe, comfortable, welcoming spot.
Yeah. Oh, Hillary's with Amos and Andy's. I did the said she was with Camp. That's okay. Thanks, thanks, Hillary. So she's in agreement. I don't know if you can see the Q&A on your side, James, for sure. But that is definitely something that EPI is looking at, and I'll bring that back up again today in our meeting, if that's a safety standard that our folks would like. And to keep in mind too is that Tourism Whistler and the Chamber are definitely not the policing entity at all. WorkSafe BC, I spoke with them last week, and they assured us that they will be coming to visit shops and to make sure that some of the safety precautions are being taken, but they're not there to police you and fine you at this point. They really want to use these experiences to meet with the retailers and restaurant owners and businesses to ensure that they use that as an educational platform, not to fine people. So usually when you hear WorkSafe BC is coming in your shop, you're on alert, you're making sure things are done differently, or maybe set up really well. But in this case, they're really using it as an educational piece. So just to keep that in mind for retailers that are on the line today, not to fear them, but to use them as an educational entity. So that being said, do you have any other, there's no other questions in the Q&A. Do either one of you have any further information or comments you'd like to make?
So I think what's interesting is that there are a few common questions that we haven't had. So one is about the rental assistance, the federal rental assistance. And I know you did a survey and you pointed out to me that BC Chamber did a survey. So I think be interesting to know if people have perspectives on that. Mm-hmm. Certainly it's something we're talking to the federal government a lot about, and even truthfully with the province, because I think there's one thing the province can do, which is institute a moratorium on commercial evictions. So there's that question that I haven't heard yet. And the other question is, I've heard a lot of questions about cash handling and what have you. And I think that's another thing. We're in a position where we have spoken to the government, so we're aware that the BC government fairly strongly understands that we can't limit cash transactions because there are British Columbians who don't have credit and debit available, but still cash handling itself is a bit of an issue. And so, for example, you need open bank branches for cash handling. You need special procedures in terms of washing hands before and after cash handling.
That makes sense to me. Yeah. Go ahead, James.
Cash handling thing with Blue Shore, it's easy to do because they were wondering if they're going to be closed. So night deposits can eliminate some of that that extra time that retailers would have to take to go into a bank, maybe line up, do those different things. So that's a possibility if cash is a big component of your work. We have not limited cash handling. I do a cash transaction probably once every 3 days. I hardly ever do them. Customers are not doing it. They are looking to use TAP at a higher level. So you can each call your own credit card processing team. So for me, Global Payments, whoever. And I've increased our TAP limit to $250. That works for credit cards. It does not work for debit cards because they are bank dependent. So that would be one step that would be worthwhile doing for everyone because, again, lets people feel more comfortable. And then if people do tap on the PIN pad, wiping it down is a good thing. So be done after every transaction.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, oh, that's really good. One of the things that James, you and I talked about as well before was some of the changes you've made in speaking to your suppliers. Did you want to comment on that, on some of the discounts you've received and what you've asked for? Putting you on the spot.
Sure. Two things. Not to dive too deep into the rental thing that Greg mentioned, but I have 3 landlords, which is always cumbersome. I got to say that my local landlord, my one place in St. Andrew's House, owned by a local guy, has been the most accommodating of all of them. So awesome to see that. The other 2, I think they're going to need a bit of a push because as long as I have continued to pay full rent, as long as I continue to pay full rent, what's their impetus to make this program work? All of the retailers who are here have had to figure out different government programs and wage subsidies and all the rest of it. And I'm not here to stand on the soapbox and tell people how to do it other than my landlords. And, you know, if I had to figure that out, they need to figure that out. So there's a possibility that my rental payments will be 25% going forwards, not the full payment. And they need to find that 75 themselves. It's a little bit confrontational and I don't like that. But one of the reasons I stayed open was to have the moral authority to say to these guys, I'm doing everything I possibly can to survive, and you need to do the same. I'm not here to protect your profit margins. I'm here to keep you in business so that I can stay in business as well. So, a concept for all those people to think of. I'm sorry, I lost the train of thought. You asked me a question.
Oh, that's okay. We had talked about sort of working with suppliers as well.
So we all have many different suppliers, and many of them are having challenges just like we are. So I was able to find a couple of suppliers that in some cases I had some winter bills owing to, and I was able to say, guys, I have very precious few dollars right now to move around. So I can look after that full payment to you if you allow me some sort of a discount on that. So a 3 to a 10% discount, whatever. Every industry is different. That has been received gratefully in some cases, so that was good. And then on the other side of it, some of these vendors of ours have too much stock for whatever reason. A lot of the retailers cancel out on things. So we've been able to do special arrangements with some of these guys. We just did a big paddleboard sale last weekend, and that's a high ticket, low margin item for us.
Right.
But I was able to work with this vendor and help them clear out some stock. And, you know, it wasn't, well, kind of on a consignment sort of a basis. Like I helped them move through stock. I didn't have inventory risk. I was able to do it at an adequate margin and got cash flow happening. So those are opportunities that everybody, it's worthwhile reviewing your business and seeing what opportunities are out there.
Right. That makes really good sense. Michelle Couture had just asked if this is a recorded session for any of you that are on there. Michelle is considering to sending this to her landlords as a webinar. So it's a really good idea. It gives landlords that are not living in our community a chance to really understand the depth of concern that we have here. And yeah, I would encourage that. It's an educational piece for everybody to hear what's happening, and that's exactly why we record them, so that you can use them in the future for repurposing them. So absolutely.
That might put me on the pointy end of the stick. Thanks, Michelle. That's okay. I don't mind. My vendor.
No, you said it really well, and it makes sense. I know that makes sense.
So I'm used to being on the pointy end of the stick, but interestingly, I'm going to talk about one piece that I found very interesting that relates to James's discussion about suppliers. Our playbook, there's a section on marketing and merchandising. And it was the most interesting thing listening to a wide range of retailers from across the country, that people are actually changing their product mix. There's a lot more change of purchasing from non-traditional suppliers, a lot of change of product mix. It's very interesting how the coronavirus is having an impact beyond the expected impact. You know, we expected e-commerce and curbside pickup, but we didn't expect as much change in terms of supplier source and product mix.
Yeah, that's true. I've seen that in different shops. James, have you done anything differently in your store?
Well, yes, we have in the way of deliveries, of course. Have we changed our mix? Not a whole bunch. We focused it. I would say that there's less selection than there may have been in the past, which is kind of awesome because SKU proliferation, SKU creep is something that absolutely stinks, and many of these retailers know that. So this has kind of forced me to say, pull it in. You know, let's do what we want and do the best job that we can.
Right.
All of the Whistler retailers, like internet sales has worked for some people. Internet sales for me we've been doing this internet sales since 2006, but I refuse to go down the toilet of margin down the price thing because we are specialty retailers. Whistler is a specialty retail area. We love that engagement with people. We can bring people into a brand and get them excited about things. and really share experiences. And that's so valuable. So internet retail for a lot of the retailers that were in Whistler is something that it may not be high on their list. It's worth reviewing, seeing what you can do, but you know, Whistler's in kind of a tough spot because we really do rely on the people coming. And we're going to see tourists again this summer. We're not going to see the same tourists. So think about who they are, who's going to be coming through, and it's that rubber tire, you know, destination.
Vancouver, and yeah.
And then we'll open up and see BC and Alberta coming in. Don't know what the American component's going to be like as we get towards the end of the summer, but preparing and having your product mix and your staff understanding what you have in anticipation of those crowds is well worthwhile.
Yeah, agreed. Absolutely. We're running short on time. So I wondered if there were any last comments that you wanted to make before we close this out. Greg?
No, but I mean, I think that what James just said is particularly important. In Whistler, the customers who are not Whistler residents are going to change. You're not going to have the cruise ship and international tourists as much. You will have, you know, British Columbians who are forced to stay within British Columbia and accordingly will choose places like Whistler as their vacation choices this summer. And they're different customers than the international tourists. So it'll be interesting to see that impact.
They are for sure. James, any last comments from yourself?
No, not really. I mean, Whistler retail crowd is fairly diverse. I've seen it evolve over 30 years.
Yeah.
And the independent soul of Whistler is super important. So, you know, Hillary's shop has been around close as long as us.
Over 20 years, she's had it in the same place.
Yeah.
I think she celebrated that last year.
Yeah. So, and a lot of the other people here have got really interesting businesses. So,
well, I know that with Hillary, she was saying, I think it was on a post where she started in Whistler. I'm talking about you, Hillary, so you might want to jump in there. Is she started delivering pizza and now she's delivering clothing, which is really interesting how she's gone from one thing to another and she's right back delivering again. But it is really amazing to me to see the innovation in our community. And, you know, Whistler is a tight group of people, and it's very quick to see how people are evolving. And we can certainly continue to learn from each other. I'm going to put it out there. WARM used to be an association. Yeah, and I don't know, James, I don't know. I know you like being involved in this. But I would love to see that association come back. And I tell you, the reason for the Chamber is working very closely with all of our members. But man, having that one-stop shop where we can get that information to a retailer and then send it all out it would be just so incredible.
It would be. And if I could, thank you for doing that, because I wanted to bring that up.
Okay, great.
Guys, Nicole from Kier started this up. I think it may have been she got involved with it early and I started helping with that. We had Kyle join us from McCoos, Emily from, I can't remember the yoga place. We had quite a few people involved with it, a number of people involved. WARM stands for Whistler Association of Retailers and Merchants. It's not just retail, but it's merchants and other people providing frontline ground level services. We need to have a group of people together who can express their wants, their desires, their concerns to parties such as, you know, TW, the resort municipality, chamber, whoever it is. So we should start this up again. And the 21 people who are on here, I'd love to have you be part of this. I'm not looking to drive the bus or anything like that.
I think you just did. No.
We need to share that workload, because no one person can or two people can take it on, but it is a worthwhile thing. So
I agree.
If you are interested, please let me know, and maybe Nicole and I can get the band back together.
I think it'd be great. I mean, we continue to advocate and we hear from retailers, and especially the retailers that are quite vocal. There's like James, you and I talk quite frequently, and I get to hear what's going on out there. So we can pass on information to Retail Council of Canada. We can pass it off to the federal government, the provincial government. We continue to advocate for you in so many different ways. So to have a joint voice would be fantastic. So great way to end this session. Greg, thank you so much for coming to us all the way from Vancouver in your kitchen.
I'm actually sitting in the dining room.
Up and having coffee there. And James, again, your intel, your experience, your passion for our community is palpable. So thank you again for all the work that you're doing, and both of you for being on this webinar. So in closing, again, we are recording these, and they will be loaded up on the website shortly. You will be receiving also an email from Chanel, who's with us with the Chamber, with different links that you can access from this discussion that we've just had here, and there'll be some tools and resources there. EPI has also, the Economic Partnership Initiative also has a resource page, which we'll share with you. So you'll get lots of good intel, and again, it's a lot, but the information's there. If you have any questions, you can contact us at the Chamber, and we'll help you walk through that. And then going on Monday, May 25th, we're hosting the first episode of our business reopening series called The Business of Mental Health. We will hear from Dr. Shahin. She's a registered psychologist at Vancouver's Copeman Healthcare Center, and our very own Lori Pine. She's the interim executive director for the Whistler Community Services Society. So the webinar is going to cover mental health needs for our leaders, with a discussion around stress management, anxiety and burnout, as well as mental health support for teams returning to work. And I can tell you, being in this position has been very stressful, and but there's a light at the end of the tunnel, and that's where we can try and keep thinking of the light at the end of the tunnel. We will get through this. So I hope you can all join us on Monday. 50% of the proceeds will go directly to Whistler Community Services to support the amazing work that they do for our community. So again, thank you, James. Thank you, Greg, for being here and taking the time to speak to our community as we look at that whole reopening phase. And be kind, stay healthy, and hopefully we'll see everybody on Monday.
Great.
Take care. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you, Greg. Take care. Bye now.